Yeah.
Morning, everyone. As you know, we do have some folks who I think are joining us by phone. That is on. So we're going to get started with the usual fun roll call that we have to do, and I'm going to just start this. So to conduct this meeting in a hybrid fashion, we need to roll call and verify that any of our remote participants. First, I'm going to conduct a roll call for those in the room, verify that we have. Next, I'm going to do verification of the remote participant voices, all in locations. So, start with Rick Sullivan.
Here.
Jennifer. Fred, I know Cookies Online. We'll come back to you. Marlene.
I'm here, thank you.
John Boylan.
Present.
Nick Rocco. Condi, we know is absent. Joe Gay. Alice Bolts. Richard Kennedy.
Here.
Harry Concanon.
Here.
Michelle Crocker. Molly Benson. Here. David Levine.
Present.
Nick Miller. Shelley Murphy. Joe Mandaro.
Here.
Ava. Mary Hayden. Barry Koji.
Present.
Art Wazowski. Here. Nancy.
Sure.
Julie Stranley, I know is on. Eleanor Vincent. Stephen Wolf. Paul Zarowski. Did I miss anybody who's in the room? Okay, now we're, Mr. Chairman, now I need to verify that the remote participants are clear, audible, and at an appropriate volume. And confirmation of their location. I asked, I can't see, is Cookie Blitz, are you on the line?
Having a little difficulty logging in.
Is there anybody else on the line right now? A few wonderful folks will let us know as people dial in. We hope.
Harder than here.
We will come back if Julia and you guys will let us know.
You know.
Not sure, Steve. So we will, Mr. Chairman, I will move that when people do come online, that we will call a roll call and make sure we can hear.
Do this all over. Do that all over. I second that motion. Any opposition? All in favor? Let me start.
I'm
Pardon?
sorry.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
Good morning, Ken. Ken,
Are you
would
talking?
please? Yes, we are. Ken McMillan, will you state your name and location you're calling from and the reason you are fine?
My name is Ken McMillan. I hope you all can hear me clearly. This Microsoft thing working too well. It should be Zoom, but anyway, I'm calling from the Drainsville district, and I can't come because you're a long way from here, and I don't have a car. So
That's great. Ken, thank you for joining us. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make the motion that all voices online may be added to the location.
Second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you. Welcome, Ken. And I know we have some guests on the line. We'll get to you during the presentation. It's great to see everybody. It is really wonderful to see everybody. It has been a busy few months, which I believe was May. And the executive committee and the homelessness committee have been very busy in these and patients. I really acknowledge and appreciate everybody who took the board survey. We acknowledge that we are going to be really relying on members of this committee to help drive the work. Because housing, our charge is a big. So we want to make sure that we're moving forward. So that, I'd like to welcome the next member here today. So really want.
Want to go around the room just quickly?
Yeah, maybe. That will, why don't we start with the member? Just introduce yourself and your role, and we'll start with.
Hey, Marie County Executive Director at the Land Center. Homelessness, Franconia District.
Paul?
Paul Grafty, Springfield.
I'm Nancy Sofford, Chairman of the Board at Family Paths, and I represent the Hunter Office.
Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Apologies for the tardiness.
Welcome.
And then just to note that we did have board supervisors did make some reappointments and agenda, just to note that very Peggy thrilled them to be able to and review. With that,
Three parts of the backbone of this organization.
I was just gonna say. So I'm just gonna move us into the consent agenda. And now immediately following the meeting, and you also have access to information online, and I'm gonna bookmark the Housing Advisory Council website and the link so that you can keep up with all that's going on. But the consent agenda includes both the minutes and also the appointment, the establishment by this group, this council, of these committees that will be able to help us with the agenda.
I'll second that, Madam Chair. The only, you don't need to change anything, but I've sort of always assumed I planned on the legislative subcommittee. Didn't really need them.
So moved.
But I've looked at it. These committees are going to be terrific, and thank you to everyone for signing up. And so I second your motion to approve these committees. Any other nominations? Anyone else want to change anything? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion down.
For the record, this meeting isn't at tender.
We noticed earlier the executive committee great opportunity really for us to be able to lay out and but one of the most important things that is happening John Boylan, very grateful for them that we share has been looking and responding to board matter that was presented by the chairman, Supervisor Paulchik, and the second board matter by Supervisor Alcorn. So at this point, we'd like to have an update on the work they've been doing, their recommendation. I also want to acknowledge Tom Burnett, who is the director of the office and homelessness with this group. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom, Eleanor, and for us on what you
Okay, good. So the homelessness committee is was very fortunate to have a bunch of really good talented people on it that were committed to having open, honest discussion about the task at hand, and also were courageous in terms of coming to a decision that we can do next. So we have been meeting weekly, I think, last couple of months now, every Monday, just in terms of moving on the station ahead. So the task for us was to look at stakeholder input, especially lived experience input, which has impact on a couple of things. So one, feeds into the strategic plan, and also had impact for the 2022 supplementary funds that came out, the $5.6 million that came out. And the committee's work took us in a couple of directions. One, the decision was made that we could not move forward with the local because even though the community needs that money, we could not because we were assessed as not being competitive because we did not have clearly the plan for lived experience that was the stigma test for HUD. That was the first thing. The second thing that the conclusion was that we were no way ready to be able to collect information from our stakeholder community in a way that would be helpful to us now in November. And the way we came to that conclusion was by looking at a couple of things. One, looking at what we've already done as a community and realizing that we've already been asking the same questions over and over again, that we would likely get the same answers, which will probably not provide any new information or help move the needle along. Two, we looked at what's been done locally. So the Council of Government had a racial equity listening sessions, more as the chair of the Fairfax was part of, and saw that they had a more intentional approach. It took about 6 months, and they had various listening sessions, and they were get a lot of really helpful data. Second thing we looked at was on the national level what's being done. A couple of things have been done. The first one looked at was something that was done with COVID. It was looking at the impact of homelessness on events. And they had a bunch of really big names come together, collaborating with national patients led by I think it's called the National Innovation Services. And they did a really nice job of getting stakeholder input across the board, across the country actually. And we're able to come up with some really helpful outcomes. The other thing we looked at was what everybody's calling the Seattle model. And replicated in Seattle, again, once again looking at homelessness, the impact of community. And they kind of did the same thing. So actually, from all of these, we came to the conclusion that we were nowhere near ready to pull it off in 2 months or 3 months or whatever the timeline was. And we also knew that as a community, we wanted to be intentional about getting this information. We also knew that we wanted to stakeholder lived experience. We recognize that the advisory body that Fairfax County had before not currently exists as it used to. We know that we have groups of lived experience groups in the county, but no way of haven't really tapped into that in any kind of intentional strategic way. We also got consultation from the county's neighborhood and community services Norman Lopez. Thank you, Tom, and Tom came in a few times and provided education to us in terms of what the county does in engaging folks through an equity lens, intentional way. So I'm saying all of this so that everybody knows that this was not a decision that was taken lightly, that we did our homework, looked at a lot of different things. And the conclusion we came to was that, okay, we can do it. It's a good ask. It's done, but we're going to need time. And so where we are right now is, I think, the decision and the full, the APAC executive committee actually supports this because they've already thought about this decision. And I believe that a couple of supervisors, according to Tom Fickman's test, have already been socialized somewhat with the idea. But this is where we're headed and are on board. So what we know the task to be right now is that we need to come up with a clear plan of very concrete timelines that we can present to them. And so where we left it right now is that one, we're proposing that we use an external, like a consultant, because we recognize that we're not the experts, that we're not the ones who do it. Also, that decision rests on the fact that we want people to come into the process knowing that we're being objective. They may not want to respond to stakeholders or public, county staff. So we've been looking at what resources we can give people for that, and some people, thank you, has made a commitment to invest some of the county funds that may be available. We've looked at the county procurement process, recognizing that if we do this, we have to follow that process, which would take anything from 6 months to 12 months, based on how much the consultant costs. I think we're intentionally going to be looking at staying within the costs, a budget that allows us to use as little time as possible to do it. And right now, Tom are going to be, they're helping us to begin to draft the scope of work, which is required in the act for the money to fund our consultants. We've also started looking at what consultants might be, viable options to be considered. So that's where we are. And the last meeting we had on Monday, the committee, we've rested for now because we figured phase one, which was to do what we were asked to do. We're coming back to the response to that, which operated in the presentation in November. And phase two will be all of what that we're talking about. At the end of this, if we're successful, we should be able to have in place a re-emergence of a lived experience advisory group or something similar. We should be able to have at least a component of this part of the strategic plan. That data should have been collected through this process. And we are hoping and have a recommendation that the full AHAC committee looked at reviving the DOT board. That's one of the other things that we're doing. And the only other thing we're asking is that the AHAC executive committee between now and the November presentation provides room to explore this further so we can have something from between now and since they're not in meetings between now and November. So did I miss anything, John, Tom, anybody else who wasn't?
So the only thing, so being a former military guy with checklist and process, which sometimes gets in your way, I think there are 4 things that we as AHAC need to look at. First is, Tom laid out some of the things we wanted to do, which was to answer the board matters for the briefing in November, look at the HUD issue, and then also begin the framework for the strategic plan. So, and then part of that we even started. We said we know this is going to be a harder part that's going to address some of the inequities and disparities with the. So I think there are 4 things. The first one is answer the board matters. We've had enough information, and I think Tom will be able to put that briefing together. Some information we provided, we've got experts around the table. So that one's kind of checked. Exactly, we did that. Second one is the HUD response, and that was part of the no-go, which as a former contractor, that's what we do all the time. It's what all the things you don't see, what you don't bid on. And there should be a discipline to how you do that. And I think that's things that Tom actually looked at and talked to a lot of folks about what not to bid on. So that was taken care of. The third thing is the phase 2. Great Hearts and Mind on the crew. They wanted to launch into phase 2, but that's not where this group commissioned us to go. I think if we want to do that, AHAC needs to say, here's the phase 2, or call it whatever it is, to address the inequities and show that it can't just be a carry on for where we were and what we started, because we think there more needs to be done. It should be something that important that we address it at AHAC and say, this needs to be done. Go do this study in that timeline. And the other thing is the strategic plan, right? So the strategic plan should be something that we pull out and look at. I'm not sure about the difference between the COC, whether that's a function they do, it's something that AHAC does because of the new form, but it shouldn't be something that just kind of comes together where it's up to Tom and just kind of pull some folks that he thinks might help write a good plan. That's got to be purposeful about how we do a strategic plan as well. So those are the 4, I think, come out of what we do. I can't thank Dr. Vincent enough for all that she's done. She put a lot of work into it, helping out.
Thank you, John. And as I said to him before, there are lots of newly designed rules, and so my task was to keep us on task and to roll the slides together and to provide us probably which we did and I did provide shared information. Thank you. Thanks, Tom.
I'm very grateful to the committee's time they've invested in this work so far and the intentionality that they put forth in thinking about how to update our strategic plan around homelessness in the best way possible, including engaging the experts, the people who are experiencing homelessness, not just in getting input, but in part of the decision-making process, being people that are at the table, actively collaborating.
Any process of engaging in realize with apologies to some board members, we have been talking about this, you know, some time as a council, and so the context here, you know, as we come out of COVID pandemic and what we saw with certainly an increase in standing up the quarantine hotels to isolate folks and protect our most vulnerable members of the community, largely for homelessness. I think it was a good time that the supervisors had a lot of questions about where are we going, and so they also charged to recharge this committee that phase of the how can we get the stakeholder input from the board of supervisors on November 30th. But the other thing in the board work plan or matter the work on our website saying I didn't repeat Tom Barnett has been working actually called on internal audit as to with some providers to gather other information. So that is an ongoing process that will be November 30th. And you were also tasked with looking at questions around permanent supportive housing, zoning questions, other things that might enable us to better meet the housing needs for currently unhoused, unsheltered. So I don't know if you want to get an update on the audit conversation before we turn it over to Tom Fleetwood and the team to talk about the zoning. What's in on all of that?
Sure. So the internal audit office for Fairfax County, they often conduct, as their name suggests, audits. In this case, they are not conducting on an audit, though. So I want to be clear. This is sort of in a management advisory role. They're kind of expanding the capacity of our office and having a third party, more objective view on what is the operational capacity and our ability to deliver on the most important outcomes when it comes to preventing and ending homelessness. And so they're looking at the kind of the top three measures that we often track: how many people we serve, how long are we serving them, and are they moving to permanent housing? Now, behind those three banner headlines, there's so much to tell, so many stories, and to explain what's contributing and restricting our success to our success. And so that is where they are going to our partner providers and getting the story behind the numbers. And they are packaging this in a way that I think the board is going to appreciate and understand in terms of how are we doing both as providers and as a system and preventing and ending homelessness. So that's one part of it. And as you'll hear in a few minutes, we're also working with the Department of Planning and Development, as well as the Office of the County Attorney, to explore options around zoning that can promote emergency shelter and permanent supportive housing resources for people experiencing homelessness. Our office is also doing sort of a scan, benchmarking with other jurisdictions to look at what are new or underutilized options that other communities are implementing and are having positive outcomes that we could replicate here in Fairfax County, and doing a cost and benefit analysis of that as well. Finally, we're also, with the Internal Audit Office, looking at a cost-benefit analysis of the use of hotels as emergency shelter, both during the pandemic and outside of the pandemic. During the pandemic, as Carrie alluded to, we used hotels to isolate and quarantine and also protect people who are particularly vulnerable to the COVID virus. But before and after the worst of the pandemic, we used it as hotels as an overflow shelter capacity for families with children. We don't want, as a county, children sleeping on the streets. And so when we see surges in demand for shelter, we turn to hotels to expand our shelter capacity. There are pros and cons with that. So this is part of the story we'll be telling in November.
On to the question of zoning or the question.
So I just want to make a few comments. There were many resources that were discussed at both the AHAC Executive Committee and within the task force that I think would be very useful for sharing more broadly. So if we could think about how do we do an awareness to the whole of AHAC about this ongoing work and the resources that are needed for it. A second would be, let's try to make sure that if we contract for a consultant to help us frame a better process of community engagement, that's a one-off, because the success of that will actually transform the presence of people around the table and in committees. I think it's illustrative that, Ken can't get here today because he doesn't have a car and he lives in the Falls Church area. So that, participation is really key, and we can't have a two-tier participation. And on that matter, I had Mary Taden recruited me and many others to be interviewers for people dealing with the extreme weather events of the summer. And so I see that as a volunteer working activity that will lead to very useful, productive engagement of those who can't all be at the table. And we should be thinking about that, not just for, our traditional understanding of sheltering during the winter time, but we have to think about the extreme weather. Any of us who witnessed Hurricane Ian, and any of us who know that Fairfax County is in an epicenter of extraordinary flooding events, we've got to be prepared to not just announce in our emergency announcements that there's going to be a major thunderstorm tonight and flooding. Seek shelter. How do people in families seek shelter under those circumstances? So I think we could open the envelope a little bit here to make sure we're looking at that for the longer period of time and starting to structurally use a better system of community engagement to actually influence all of our work, not just this aspect of the work. I think it's really important and could be quite productive.
I guess just to wrap it up from the work that we did, one of the things I think we realized is that in order to get to what Jerry is saying, which is to open it up, and to really look at also of 50,000, feet perspective rather than from the, bottom up, is to get that external eye for people who have been doing this at a national level, and they can hold us, they can hold the process honest, they can accountable. Of everything from equity. There was a lot of conversation that we had on equity, and that at the end of this, we want to see lived experience participation that's not just a token patient, but that's empowered. We even talked about, some places that are compensating individuals with lived experience to that way, even in terms of giving their input. So the consultants, they would know, this is where they're going to really push us. And they need to come in here and push us and push us to question what we've done historically, so that we can be sure that at the end of the day, it's a more inclusive, data set that we're working with. And the last thing that I'd say is that one of the other things that came out of this is, thanks to John, the beta novi process that is now going to be incorporated into the COC policies, just in terms of making sure that we have something that we can look at. It's not a checklist, right? That says, okay, there's money coming through, sounds wonderful, but is it a go or no go? we basically go through everything so we can do that proactively. So we can be good stewards of the resources that goes to carrying those systems. So all in all, again, thank you guys for the input. Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up a little bit on what Jerry said. Another board matter from another committee, which is the short-term committee, which was to look at how homeless people could be better supported during high heat waves and storms in the summertime. And this was started late, but in July. And the question, of course, came up is what do they need? And I said, well, we have to ask them because we don't know what it's like. So we split up into committees, and I was the chair of the Communications and Outreach Committee. And we created a little survey. It was supposed to be short, it was a little bit longer, but it was fine. And the Communications Department made that available on cell phones in several languages. We engaged, I think, all of the drop-in centers, maybe not all. Engaged all that I know of, the county ones, the state community, Lamb Center, and they all helped administer this community and help allow access for our volunteers to go in and administer the survey to residents who were there for lunch or programs or whatever. We had about 17 volunteers, including Jerry, myself, and maybe some other people here, and we went out to the shelters and did that. We compiled the results, and we have some information. Now, we had 81 homeless people who were interviewed.
Almost this summer.
We did this summer. They had the criteria was that you had to have been homeless at some point this summer, and you had to only have not taken the questionnaire before. And then you were interviewed, and there were a lot of multiple choice questions. So we had some nice bar charts, and we asked both for how to best to communicate with them, and also what things they needed, which we fed into the other committees who are working on fulfilling the actual needs. And we also had a number of open-ended questions, which we just decided to list all of the answers because they're really quite moving. And they give a lot of insight into what it's like to be out on the streets during high heat time and rain and floods, and how you get all wet in your tent and there's water and there's no place to go and you can't dry out, you don't have any clothes. And in the heat, there were a lot of health effects. A lot of people reported, well, that sounded to me like fairly serious health effects. People overheated and not being cool off. So we can make that available to people. Certainly we should give it to the bigger committee. I would think.
So this committee is called the Emergency Heat Response Stakeholder Group, and Mary and Carrie are both on the Communications and Outreach Committee, but we also have a Transportation Committee looking at transportation options, infrastructure, and tiered response, knowing that with the weather, there's different levels of threats to people's health. How do we step up our response based on that? And a supplies and distribution, because there's often a need for water, fans, other ways to cool off. And so that this committee is looking at all of these different options.
We're trying to push this quickly because we want to get it into budget season in October in the agencies, and we have things that are going to require some outlay. We want to know about that, but I assume we'll also have a report later. And we also coordinated with the Resilience Fairfax report people, and they came and presented to us, and they have identified homeless and low-income people as like the most at risk, the most vulnerable, the least resilient, the most harmed people in the county, in the world, during climate change, especially the heat and storms. We actually were able to put a few words, I think, into their final report as well.
Thank you, Chair, or Madam Chair, Co-Chair. I had a follow-up question about the HUD grants, if you don't mind. So if I heard correctly, it was a $5.6 million grant that we were unable to, that we did a no bid on, and I'm in government contracting, so I get it. The importance of having a good bid, no bid processing process in place. Is this a recurring grant opportunity, and is there another window that is coming up for that same grant? As well as thinking about this 6 to 12 month timeframe for the consultant, because this is filling that gap that prevented us from leaving money on the table that we would have qualified for otherwise, is what I'm hearing. With that 6 to 12 month timeframe, once we procure it, which is going to take us, 90 to 180 days or something, who knows? What other deadlines are coming up? What other opportunities are coming up that we are preparing for, and that might drive that time frame to make sure that we don't leave more money on the table while we're trying to fill that gap?
Yeah, and I can respond to some of the
Great.
questions. So there was an annual continuum of care competition nationally that we always done quite well over the years to increase our total. We're now close to $11 million a year that we get through this continuum of care program. This supplemental or special notice of funding opportunity was kind of recaptured funds from that annual competition that they put out there, the federal government. As far as we know, it's a one-time.
Kind of clawed back and spent money. Okay.
Right. Exactly. So the intention is to target those communities with the highest unsheltered populations. So there was a very clear scoring methodology where communities that had over a certain number threshold of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness got by far much more points that would put them far and ahead of the rest. But there was also the expectation from HUD that there was people with lived experience of homelessness in the governance process. And we were able to respond by October 20th with a comprehensive unsheltered homelessness strategic plan. So that what the assessment that Eleanor referred to and John was that our community was not only not competitive because we didn't have lived experience work group, but we were not sort of the target community for HUD. But I think we still need to ready our preparedness for either additional funding opportunities or without any funding opportunities, simply having a better unsheltered homelessness response plan as a community. So I think there's multiple opportunities there.
That actually, thank you so much for clarifying that, because that actually makes me feel more optimistic. I'm just hearing like money left on the table. What I'm hearing is lessons learned. We didn't qualify for that one, but it exposed a gap that we had in our planning, and now we're doing something with that gap. Whether or not it applies to future grants, we know it's going to benefit. Okay.
It will increase our competitiveness for the annual cycle as well.
Sure.
And so we definitely need to do this.
Okay.
Before we segue to the next, we're ready for the next. Yeah, before we go to Tom, picking up on what Jennifer was talking about, I wanted to take a moment and just compliment the committee. Thank you for what you did. Membership should know that the executive committee spent a lot of time on this in our last meeting. And Jennifer, there was this sort of, wait a minute, we're leaving money on the table, disappointment. But became very clear is that you all have recommended precisely the right strategy. And was the right decision. More important than to do it right. All the facts together. So we talked a lot about it. And I just want to compliment the committee to get the right decision.
Morning, everyone. Tom Fleetwood, Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development. One important aspect of the board matters that came out over the course of the last few months with respect to homelessness was a direction for us to look at the possibility of potentially using commercial and industrial zone properties for shelter or potentially even from supportive housing type use. And based on that direction, we have been working hand in glove with our partners at the Department of Development and the Office of County Attorney to come up with some ideas of how we might move something forward. What you're going to hear today are concepts, not specific language. For your feedback, we are at the very beginning of this process and want to get your initial thoughts here. We are joined today by Graham Owen, Megan Van Dam, and Bill Maitland, online from the Department of Planning and Development. Our zoning administrator, Leslie Johnson, is here, and Laura Gorey from the Office of the County Attorney's Office of County Attorney is also here. And we're so appreciative of your partnership and for you all being here today. And I think to walk us through the concepts, I think we're going to have Mr. Maitland speak at this point.
Is there a presentation, or are we just gonna hear that we made from our members?
Right, there's going to be this sort of a discussion on this.
Okay, while we're getting that up, I see that Cookie Blitz has joined us, and Cookie, could you state for the record your name, where you're calling from, and why you're not here?
Yes, and I apologize. I've had a ton of technical difficulties today. Cookie Heimer Blitz calling from Herndon, Virginia. I'm unable to attend due to a medical reason.
Thank you so much. For the record, I think we could all hear Cookie.
Yes.
I'm sorry, anything else for me?
Oh, you're good, Cookie, thanks.
You're official. You're officially here.
Thank you. I can't see any of you and you can't see me.
He can unmute, so we cannot unmute. Mr. Malin, can you unmute yourself and present?
Sorry, I was having some technical issues. Bill Malin, Department of Planning and Development. Can you hear me? Yeah, the audio on my end is very difficult to hear, so it's been a little challenge to follow along. So I apologize for that. I'm not there today. So as Mr. Fleetwood has mentioned, we've been working with Housing Community Development to talk about potential options for alternative uses for commercial buildings for supportive housing. So what we've been talking about internally was to provide an opportunity for the Board of Supervisors to consider an amendment where we'd be using a special exception process to allow for these uses to be established by private entities. If the county was to establish a supportive housing, it would be considered a public use and it could be done by right. But if a private entity wanted to establish a supportive housing use in a commercial or industrial area, reusing an existing building, the process that we were looking to consider would be a special exception process. And right now we're just talking through some concepts. Some of the concepts we're considering is that the use would be targeted for folks who would be making 60% area median income or less. The operator of that use would have to certify that yearly to ensure that that meets the target. There would be some flexibility where we would consider income averaging. So, if an individual, or a family exceeded the 60%, they would not necessarily be removed from the supportive housing, but the facility as a whole could provide the income averaging of that 60% to provide some flexibility both in occupying the structure as well as the folks who reside there. Other things that are in discussion is, when this use would come to the board are being proposed, is to ensure that it's in close proximity to some sort of a bus service, mass transit, or mixed use area. So we know that the individuals who will be residing in this area are not disconnected from the community. Some of our commercial and industrial areas may not have ready services. So we want to make sure that when they're located in these areas, there is either services in proximity to them or ability to get into mass transit to be able to access services. So with the special exception process, this is an individual review of each application. It goes through Planning Commission, Board of Supervisors review. We would certainly have internal staff review. Housing and Community Development would certainly be able to partner with Department of Planning and Development to ensure that the operator has a skill set and knowledge to be able to provide the supportive housing. So during the process, individual applications could be reviewed, and conditions could be imposed by the board to ensure that the use is both providing the best asset to the community as well as protecting the existing residential or commercial uses in the area. So that's very brief discussion, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions. And I'm not sure if anyone else, if Leslie's in the room, if she wants to add on to that or others.
Again, this was intended to just provide a snapshot of where we are at this point. And I see Ms. Johnson wishes to speak.
Well, I just wanted to, and thank you for having us here and kind of sharing our initial thoughts with regard to how we might address the board's request. And so one of the things that we're looking at here is that this would not be a residential use. What we're trying to think about and what we would call it was similar to what we have in the zoning ordinance today, which was new when we did our new update of the zoning ordinance EMOD. It's called alternative use of historic structures, which gives the board flexibility in using historic buildings for other purposes. So kind of paralleling on that, what we're thinking about is creating a similar use called alternative use of commercial buildings for supportive housing, and then kind of have certain parameters and standards that Bill talked about regarding how this would kind of be used. So we would, because otherwise, quite frankly for you, although if it's just multi-family housing, it's not permitted in commercial and industrial business. So this kind of use would be unique in that we're really looking at services that are being provided in conjunction with that use, so that it really has its own kind of, it's a special use. The other use that we have in the zoning ordinance today is congregate living facilities, but that's not currently permitted in some of the commercial and industrial business. So we kind of thought that this might be a better approach to kind of have a separate use for this, and then we put it in our chart. Some of the other standards that we were looking at would be that for purposes, because the county also, I would note, has a current in the policy plan of the current plan, we have a policy right now for repurposing of commercial buildings. So this kind of does dovetail to an extent, although in the industrial repurposing, it talks about not allowing residential, because when you think about it, we want to be here within walking distance, and think about not all of our industrial districts, some of them. I mean, it's not an appropriate place to be having housing. It might be close to some employment, but restaurants, food, shopping, things like that, bus service. So that's why we were kind of looking at it. So when the board has asked us to start looking at the repurposing, so I think this is a good opportunity to kind of put those two policies together. So what we would be looking at more would be buildings designed or used for office, hotel, retail, and other institution purposes. So again, we're still kind of thinking through this and fleshing this out a bit. But the kind of beauty of it is that we need some flexibility for the board to consider, and then they can vote with any through the special exception. We would define what an emergency shelter was, and we would define in the ordinance what permanent or supportive housing is, so that we have that captured. And then if this use were to be provided by the county, like our Bailey shelter or something, then it would be considered a public use, and it's permitted in the zoning. So the this would be really focused on private, kind of nonprofit entities that would want to, have this ability.
Just one quick question. Thank you for that presentation. But it triggered in my mind the emphasis on emergencies. I thought that's what we were focusing on, and I think that the idea of emergencies would give the Board of Supervisors a little bit more right to act. I just want to see how that is true, or am I missing something?
Well, there would, I think for the board to act, again, I mean, I think there would have to be an emergency declaration of some sort, like we have with COVID, which allowed for the board to do certain things, and that was based on a state declaration. So this is a little bit different. I think what we were looking at and what the board matter was really talking about was that, and what was presented by some, the private nonprofits was to, have an opportunity to use some vacant commercial or office buildings possibly to provide for shelter during the season. We're not prohibiting that through this, but I think in talking with our partners with HCD, I think, some of the focus would be perhaps there could be an emergency shelter along with supportive housing, similar to the Bailey model. I mean, I think that's and I'll let Tom speak to that more clearly, but that was kind of our thought.
One is, I heard that this would be if it's done, a special exception process. So let me just clarify, that means that there would first be, for any proposal, there would first be a hearing before the board, before the planning commission, and then a hearing, excuse me, a hearing before the board for the final decision, correct? As all special exceptions are.
I'm having trouble.
I'm sorry.
I'm having trouble hearing today.
I'll project a little more. In other words, this would be a special exception process.
It is a legislative process, so there would be an application that was filed.
Application followed by a planning commission hearing, followed by a board hearing.
Correct, and there would be, and one of the things that we have to look at is a fee, but we're really looking at a very low entry, into this process. I mean, we're not trying.
No. I just wanted to clarify that, because of course that raises, when there's a hearing process, it's not a slam dunk. Just so we're all aware of it. I'm not objecting to it. It makes sense to me. Second question, are we at a stage now in this zoning amendment where it would be helpful for AHAC to take a position with the board? In other words, I don't know what the timing of this proposed amendment is, vis-a-vis the board's, decision, and there'll be a public hearing on the zoning amendment, right? So that's the question. What's the timeline?
Currently, these are just concepts.
So we're real early.
I think the next step would be what we wanted to do today was to get some initial feedback from you all as to, is this something that could work, and is this the direction that we want to head? And then we would take the board in November as part of the response to the board matter, kind of maybe with a little bit more detail, but just again, concept. And once we had that direction, then we would move forward with putting together the text and and doing some additional outreach. I mean, we still would have to do some outreach, but
so at some point we should be weighing in, but it's too soon. It's not. And I'm glad you came to us before, in the early in the process. It's good to get feedback. I think that's great. Thank you.
Do we have any idea of the availability of such properties that could be used this way? I mean, how plentiful are they at this point?
We have not done an in-depth study at this point about that? I mean, again, these are just concepts. I mean, I do know that there are buildings out there. And again, this is just another tool in the toolbox, if you will, to provide opportunities. It doesn't mean that, it really depends on the provider, the service, who they want to do this. And then if there is a building that somebody has identified or, that might be a good opportunity for this.
Another way to look at it is that this, at the end of the process, when we have language in place, it puts us in a position to be more responsive to opportunities that emerge in the market.
I would just add that on top of that, it is to encourage the market to become innovative in its own way for repurposing geography. It shouldn't just work. I know you can work hard and get it done, but you need to liberate other people thinking about the fast change in business operations that have occurred because of COVID that now could provide many, many more opportunities for communities. Shouldn't just be on the government.
Very totally liberated.
I'm going to build off of what Jerry is saying by asking, can you refresh my memory and then I have a follow-up? Is the board matter, was it limited in scope to supportive housing only? Because I thought it was broader than that in terms of like rezoning commercial or residential in general.
The board specifically and supportive services.
Okay.
So I think part of what we're proposing in this concept is that we supportive housing as part of these options. Because we know that for some populations where housing is desperately needed.
Sure. And actually, as a that's but what Jerry's saying about the whole, changing the world, commercial use, rezoning, all these things we have to be that. My concern is that sometimes not we like the like a step forward and then we're like, oh, that's done. And I'm concerned that we make this a little special exception for supportive emergency housing, and then we forget to go back and say, well, now we need to look at rezoning commercial, big blocks of it, or rethinking this for affordable housing, middle income housing, because that's actually our bigger pain point in Fairfax County in so many ways, affecting more people and broader swaths of the county. So I just want to put a little bug in our ear that this is a carve out for a really important use, but there's only so much supportive and emergency shelter that we need, but we need a lot of housing for firefighters and teachers and waiters and waitresses that, there's commercial buildings sitting empty. And then I do have a follow-up question, which is, will these, when they're under the special exception, will they continue to be taxed as commercial or will they be taxed as residential?
Let Crystal Ball say, Tom. That is an excellent question to which I do not have the answer. But we can find out.
That's a big impact on our.
Cookies online.
Yeah, this is Cookie. I'm sorry, I'm having a little difficulty with the audio, so if I jumped in at the wrong time, forgive me. I just wanted to make a very broad comment. I know this is in a nascent phase and there's a lot to consider. I just want to put in there that at this phase is the right time to be considering what accessibility looks like. And I don't know what will be required because it's not clear to me what kind of project this is, but to make sure that we don't miss those things, because what can happen is it's kind of not at high on the list, and then arrangements are made, new units become available, we're housing people and realize that it's very expensive and time consuming to make them accessible. So whatever those considerations are, whether it's universal design, whether it's a set aside, to make sure that there are meaningful accommodations. And I know that the Disability Services Board has people with life experience that are quite willing to advise you or even see units or be part of construction.
Cookie, thank you. That's always a timely question, and actually was something I was going to follow on as a provider. I really appreciated Mr. Malin's comments about when we consider this, you have to consider the people that we would live there and their access to services and all of those things. So absolutely appropriate when he factored into the conditions. And I think we had John and then Nick.
So as the Chamber of Commerce guy with all the businesses, think about the airport. There's that little airport out in the western part and noise abatement where no housing, right, in certain decibel levels. But you know what? It's affordable housing for homeless people. I'd rather take the house than worry about the noise. Is that fair to them, right? So we need to think about certain places where that may not be acceptable. I think, and also some of the businesses are really struggling to find people. If you could put people that need a home but actually could have a job, they would love to have some folks be able to help them out in that kind of environment. But I think this is a good idea because there's a break, right? So just trying to lean forward, there's always a chance to say no to certain places, but I don't want it to be perceived as putting homeless folks that need help in an area that isn't desirable or could be dangerous, especially for families, something we need to consider. But I think you allowed enough room to have that conversation, so I'd support it.
A couple quick questions. I thought I heard Malin say that it was 80% AMI, 60 and down to 30, and I guess below the unemployed, right? So is the intention that this would be strictly for permanent supportive housing, folks on vouchers, or is the thought that it would be kind of a mix, kind of like the Bloom in Alexandria, where you essentially can walk in as homeless, and then as you get a job, you can move up and live on the second floor at 40% AMI, and then on as you get further situated.
Mr. Malin has come online. Did you hear that?
Yes, I think I heard the question. So we're looking at options for both, whether it be an emergency shelter or permanent supportive housing that would be accommodated. Again, this is private sector, so it could be separate uses or it could be a combined use where they work together. So right now, from a discussion standpoint, we talked about 60% AMI. Again, that's just its initial starting point for discussion purposes.
Thank you. And the second question had to do with the difference between the private process for the special exception and then the public process. So if the property was owned by, I'm going to assume Board of Supervisors and or FCRHA, they would not need to go through the special exception process to do this?
The public facility would be the board, but FCRHA would not fall under public. Housing and community development could fall under public. So it would have to be directly tied to the board to be allowed as a public use, which would be permitted by right. There may be a 2232 process for review, but it would not require the special exception. But RHA is not a public entity by definition.
Thank you.
I would just like to add that, getting to the income provision, we chose, there's other provisions dealing with affordable housing, the ADU ordinance, the work-based dwelling unit ordinance, and so we were trying to address incomes that were, where you find your homelessness and the need for supportive housing, which is, the 60% kind of and below. And the other reason is that we need to make the distinction between, again, the income and the services that are being provided versus just putting in a regular multifamily building where the income may be at 65 or 70 as an affordable dwelling unit development or something like that. So that's why we were making.
I was trying to circle the square on that.
Yeah, that's kind of why we're looking at that income, but not to say, given, for financing, we have to discuss this about financing purposes, in order to make this happen, providers may need financing. So maybe there's the flexibility that you could income average or whatever, but, you know, at some point, majority of the services have to be for that population and that income level.
Can I take the chair's prerogative and say that I think we, first of all, want to thank both of you for being here to talk through this. I think this is clearly something, this is exciting. There's something that we're looking at as a potential solution as we're seeing our community changing. But I think we also know, as Joe and I know Ken, we all have, and myself as a provider, all have a lot of thoughts about that, including the services that need to be paid for, CSB, all of that. So that this was wonderful to have the concepts. I think I'd like to have a sense of the council that this is great in progress work, that there will be some additional, we have some good questions for you all to consider, and that will get you some additional input, perhaps calling on that. Even the homelessness committee that's been looking at some of this, and some of the folks around this table that have a lot of expertise from the development side and the provider side to just weigh in and give you comments before you finalize the recommendations.
And then as we go to the board in November, again, we probably won't have official text, if you will, but we'll have these concepts and they may be fleshed out a little bit further, but once we kind of, and we wanted to have, I think, we wanted to have some input before we, you know, if you all think that this is just not the best idea, you know, do we even want to go to the board with it? I don't know. So that's why we wanted to at least get some initial feedback, and then there will be additional outreach once we get into the devil is always in the detail, and once we get into the specific language process, that kind of thing, and there would be definitely a lot of additional outreach that we would do with providers and citizens.
I think that clearly concept is good, and I think there are a lot of devil that need to be explored and for this to move forward. And I think we heard again sort of where the right conditions, the right opportunities, and I think we identified some of those.
And you know, what I'm thinking now about the timing. When's the next meeting of the whole AHAC? It's not for.
We will not be meeting
Until January.
before the November 30th, but we can meet with you all, and we can certainly call if we can have some more detailed language, share that with you all, and make a decision about whether we want to offer support or.
So the executive committee could speak on behalf of the whole.
We are meeting at the end.
So we I just want to be sure that.
Is there any way I can? Is there any way I can?
That Ken?
I think it's Ken. Go ahead, Ken.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to put my sense in there. I will have a discussion about this using this platform for meetings later on, because as you noticed, I was off air for about 45 minutes and just got back in. But I want to just say one thing that as an ex-firefighter, I want to make sure that we are going after those who are vulnerable. And I don't know of any firefighter, police officer, or school teacher who, they have a hard time finding affordable housing, but I don't know of any of them that are homeless at this moment. And I think that if we're going to be successful in this, we need to get those who are vulnerable, who are actually on the street, into housing first. Workforce housing, when we started the one that's over by the government center, I tried to apply to that, and I had a unique ability because I was the first to know about it from the street level, and I applied for it. I didn't get it, and because I didn't get it, it allowed me to stay in the most treacherous place that I've ever lived in, that I'm now out of. But what I want to say is, yes, our teachers, our firefighters, our police officers do need housing. I really, really would love to see police officers living in the very community that they are policing, because that creates a greater community. But right now, we have people who are at risk. And if we're going to be successful with this, we need to get those people who are at risk, especially after the pandemic. We need to get them into housing first before we can attack those who, who are actually making a living but can't afford to live here. And I would want to make sure that people are considering those options. So unless you can come to me and tell me you know of a firefighter, a teacher, or a police officer who is not living in a house or home, okay, I think that we're going wrong in one-sided way. And our priority should be for those who are affected, who are about to lose their lives, who are in danger, who are in peril. It's women, especially women with children. That should be our main priority. If we want to be successful with that, we can always come back and fix the others because they're not going to be at risk as much as those who are. And that's my 2 cents.
Beautiful comments and sentiments, and I think we heard that right up front in Nick's question about the sense of emergency and why this was considered. And we've also heard this range. This is just one, I'm going to call it tool, a resource for us in our charge, which is broad and wide. But what a beautiful way to call us to to this and to be mindful of why we are looking at this opportunity, the concepts and how they can be used to meet that need. So thank you. With that, I am gonna
I just wanted to, all I wanted to say, to finish up, was that if it's useful, we could say today to communicate to the board that AHAC supports the concept, having not seen all the details yet, but we are supportive of, moving ahead with developing.
Well, I think that's sort of what Tom,
I think that
and I
makes
see
it-
a lot of nodding heads,
I
so
approve it.
I think, I'm not sure we need a vote on that, Thomas, but you can certainly say to the board, you had a very productive and receptive AHAC meeting.
Yes.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mail and folks on the call and joining us. And I did want to point out that the agenda did say that we were meeting till 11, but the invitation you received to join us did invite you to stay till 11:30. So we hope just pointing out we have a couple of other big items.
And there's a document that says till 12.
Yeah.
It's very fluid.
Don't tempt us, don't tempt us.
I did want to acknowledge Ava. And I also want to acknowledge special, but Shelley Murphy, who has joined us as well for the record. But I just wanted to, for those of you who don't know, Shelley was honored recently at the Virginia Housing Alliance as a game changer in our industry for all the work we've done. At the end of the year, but it's doing great. Still, so there's a long legacy that I think up next are moving to the
said that there were still it's got 2 horses. And those 2 horses.
If you can mute your phone.
in the interest of time to go right into the recommendations rather than going through the entire presentation. That'd be helpful. Okay. Maybe just to set this up, and certainly the APAC Executive Committee has heard the recommendation. It's going to talk about both the preservation update, the recommendations we have there, going to the Board of Supervisors. Lost on that. I've heard the presentation 14 times. Might be better at this, but also there was a presentation. Supervisor Housing Committee as well for those that because you all are wants and one. I know we do this all the time. So we're going to turn it over to Bree. We've had a lot of information about this. Jerry's point earlier, all of the materials that we send out in advance are also in resources that we mentioned are on our website for you to deep down on. We'll turn it over to Grace. So much. So I'm going to provide an update on our work on the comprehensive plan amendment for preservation. I have to be on the line as well to help answer any questions. Then I'll go into the additional work we're doing on other task force recommendations. I think I'm actually going to start on slide. So the task force recommendations had multiple recommendations pertaining to a comprehensive amendment for affordable housing. So we collaborated with DPD draft text, which I have passed out. If you don't have any ideas. Okay. So ultimately, we drafted text that solidifies a policy of one-for-one replacement of existing affordable units that are being redeveloped. Okay, for the center. Okay, I'll do my best. You don't realize you have soft voice until you're in a room talking to people. So, as I was saying, ultimately we drafted text that solidifies one-for-one replacement as a policy for existing affordable units being redeveloped. Policy utilizes the land use process to assist with preservation. And we are also reviewing additional land development incentives that would complement this plan amendment that I'll discuss later on in the context of the other recommendations that we're working on. So in order to test out how to assist with preservation, we looked at our existing survey of market affordable properties. These properties are older and they're vulnerable to development. So it gave us an idea of what we might see come in being developed. So while we were thinking about how to make preservation more viable, we looked at how additional density might play into this plan amendment to be an incentive. And this led to a couple different methodologies being tested out, such as one market rate unit for one affordable unit preserved, and then different percentages and ratios based on the amount of preservation being done, which would be kind of similar to the WTU policies. So each site is just so unique, though, that for each scenario we played out, it might work for one property, it won't work for a whole host of other ones. So we determined that we would need a flexible approach to applying that additional density for preservation. I'm trying to skip around to keep this briefer than my whole presentation that many of you heard multiple times. So the proposed draft text seeks one-for-one replacement of affordable units developed. It introduces an affordability analysis where each plan amendment and zoning case would go through a process to see if any existing affordable units are being affected by the redevelopment. And it includes a flexible methodology for applying incentives that will assist in the preservation, such as density and financial assistance. HCD and DPD staff will evaluate each amendment and zoning case as they come in individually. And additional density may be granted above plan guidance without a comprehensive plan amendment if certain conditions are met. And then financial assistance may be utilized, such as using our blueprint loans or other means treated as it would for a preservation deal outside of the context of the development. And this would add a sixth objective to the policy plan and an additional appendix. We are currently conducting public outreach for the amendment. We've gotten some input so far, and community industry meetings will continue throughout October and early November. So slide 7. Many of you were there for the Board Housing Committee meeting on September 30th. We are also presenting to the Planning Commission Housing Committee on October 20th, publishing the staff report in November, and our hearings will be in December and January. Stop there before we get to the additional recommendations. See if anyone has any questions on the plan amendments.
By January, those will be built into the zoning ordinance?
The comprehensive plan. I certainly hope so. Yes. Yeah.
An open comment period.
Yes. There is an open comment period, through October 28th. Currently. And we have a plan amendment website where there's a comment form, very easy to send over comments. And also accept them through my email or call me, whatever methodology.
So I know this we're still coming up, I don't know. But it may not come soon enough. I know there's a separate process coming up for manufactured housing. But the reality seems to be outpacing the speed of government. And I'm wondering if one aspect, if we can't include mobile home communities in the one-for-one replacement area of this, with more about them to come in another plan.
Yeah, that was what we were thinking at one point, and we ultimately decided to keep it as it was because we didn't want to create confusion with the lack of other comprehensive plan actions on manufactured housing. It's certainly something we consider putting back in. That is what we were thinking at one point. So if we're looking at a separate manufactured housing that should be authorized, and then we can work on that. So if we talking to DPD about this, and we were thinking that if a plan amendment or a zoning case does come in, work will be underway on that plan amendment. So there would be, an expectation that upholding what we're trying to achieve in that plan amendment that is being worked on.
What if it's not a zoning amendment? This is the quite a thing to do. Some of the zoning is a little iffy with manufactured housing.
So I'm here.
The question, does this only come into play if there's a zoning amendment required? And if no zoning amendment is required, this component doesn't come into play.
Well, the thing that if they're going to redevelop, they would need to.
I think the answer is yes. Okay.
Some of the manufactured housing is built on land that's zoned, for example, business. The problem is what they want to do with it. They want to have multiple against residential development. So I'm going to keep pushing to get this in, because some of the mobile home parks are very endangered at the moment. They may not last until the wheels turn to another.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we can absolutely figure out that.
I just got an email that you will be sending to the planning commission on October 20th at 7:30 on the preservation of existing affordable housing and also on the manufactured housing amendment at 8:30. So everyone can tune in. It's not an opportunity to ask questions from the audience, but you'll be able to hear the presentation and questions from the planning commission. So I have a question on how this works. So we have the Lincolnia amendment that went through maybe 2 years ago now. And one of the follow-on motions was about the preservation of affordable housing. So I don't know if you're familiar with that area. It's Landmark Plaza over in Mason. And I'm just wondering if you could give an example of how this would apply to a rezoning to implement that comp plan that was adopted. And if you can't answer now, maybe for the October 20th.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with that specific case, but it's existing affordable housing.
We have a significant amount of affordable rental properties surrounding Landmark Plaza. Right, and there was a concern about losing the affordable housing, the market affordable housing there. So
they were being redeveloped, they were part of the application or they were adjacent.
Okay, so it was a concern about the whole change of the entire area. Yeah, I mean, in that case, if it's not part of the application, I'm not sure why, because I'm assuming that the concern would be something to develop the rest of it. I was right for redevelopment around it, is that correct? Correct, yeah. So, but I think there was a concern of how the zoning application, commercial, there was, living components to it, how that would all work together. So maybe we can discuss that. Yeah, I'd like to see how this would actually work, because I do believe we have to follow one of. Okay, that'd be awesome. Yeah, we can chat with you. You know, they're having a hard time, hearing us. Otherwise, it's really internet.
What happens if, or has happened in the past, or might happen in the future, if the developer, rather than redevelop market affordable development, were to decide, ask for a zoning change and not make it residential anymore and get rid of it completely? Would they have to, I mean, there's nothing in here that addresses that as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
But it could happen. In other words, is there any mechanism currently, should there be, if not, that would require the developer to replace those affordable units?
You're thinking if they rezone to commercial?
Yeah,
And they're
or
not
something
looking to
else. I'll give you an example that's right on my mind now because it just happened. It's nothing will change in the near future, but someday it will. Inova Health System has purchased the land on which a very large current market rate development housing complex, which is just north. It is adjacent to the Fairfax Hospital campus. It is north of it. It has 750, I believe was the number I was told when I asked, units, and their market rate affordable. Inova will not be operating they're not going to be operating the housing. They're staying out of it completely. This is meant, I've suggested to them that they make sure that when the news release, the press release it just talked about the future and long range. And I said, long range means different things to different people. And I was told by Inova that the county knows about this. I don't know if you guys know about it. Maybe not.
It does now.
I think this. So it is very long range, really long. They just, in other words, someday they will want to, they will want to expand the campus. It's like when they bought the campus, the new campus across Gallows Road. They didn't do anything with it for years. They owned it, they owned the property, but they didn't do anything with it for many years. That's what they see this one as to. But someday those 750 units that are multifamily housing are going to go. And so I'm not trying, and I'm not saying that one should be horrified at this because it's probably a good idea for Fairfax Hospital. On the other hand, what about those 750 units? And is there any way the county can require, whether it's Inova or another entity, that they replace them? Because I mean, obviously there would have to be a zoning change, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think, yeah, I would just, DPD said that, if they likely need a rezoning and possibly a plan amendment. So in that context, I mean, we'd still ask for one full replacement. They could potentially do something mixed use and have units, right? We also have, we also will allow for additional intensity versus additional density if they do replace those units. So if they do want more commercial space, that could benefit them if they do replace those units. The ask would still be that the replacement of the units. That is
Well, it won't be commercial. If an overuse, let's put it this way, if they'll expand the hospital. That's not commercial.
Yeah, sorry, it's non-residential.
It's a special exception. Yeah. Healthcare, yeah. That require healthcare facilities require a special exception.
You said that would be considered as part of a rezoning, that.
Yeah, well, would be rezoning and also, right.
Sure, yeah. Like, I mean, we could grant additional
Well, see, the
non-residential.
board is like, for something like that, the board would be very likely to want to do it. Okay, so, but then what happens is $700. I don't remember that.
Okay.
either.
Thank you.
It's,
Okay.
I have the press release.
Kimberly?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Right there on Gallows.
Yeah, I have another thing on the family. Everything get replaced. This is in the embark development and BRT stops with the Transylvania development scheduled for high density already. And this is the owner of this land has already put in an FSBA request, which was denied at that time. But he'll be back. And this is about 700 apartments, the garden apartments. Maybe a little bit above the 60%. They don't show up in the real affordable, and there are people in there working. Very next, we start, and that's a lot of units, and he under the WDU and ADU would not even come anywhere close to replacing all of those units. So you're saying this comp plan amendment would make him build 700 units in the price ranges that these people are paying now, along with his increased density?
I think it's really just kind of taking a step back on this. I think it is really important that we remember that this comprehensive plan amendment related to preservation is one tool in the toolbox. It is not, by definition, it cannot be the cure-all and will not by itself result in one-for-one replacement. It's also important to recognize that this is comprehensive plan language. It is not zoning ordinance language. So I just want everybody to, I just want to make sure that the use of the plan language here would be augmented and part of sort of the mosaic of solutions we would bring to the table to help get as close to one as possible or to exceed it. And that includes, our financial mechanisms, most importantly. So just wanted to reframe that to make sure we're all together.
Thank you.
And that, I think that is important, and there are some of these things, the concepts that are here. We have this month to, as individually and as a group, that additional recommendations, questions for the presentation. But I would note that we do have some folks on this council that signed up who are interested in the preservation conversation, and a lot of it is out of the preservation committee that met and made some of these recommendations. I would like to, after this meeting, charge that group with a quick conversation about any other issues or input that they had would want to give officially regarding the comp plan amendments, and do it that way, have them bring it back to the executive committee so we can bring some additional comments that are formal recommendation or endorsement from APAC. And I would encourage, note these, you have this presentation. So there are other opportunities to through that, some of the other questions. But that is okay. We would like to do that following the meeting, and just let me know, or Regina, if you're interested, but we have about 5 or 6 people who have already signed up. Yeah, now can we skip to slide 10, just to cover some other actions that we're currently taking. Okay, so on the early warning system, as per the task force recommendations, I continuously monitor store listings for multifamily properties that are for sale, and we evaluate preservation opportunities to us, whether that is seeing a multifamily property for sale or hearing about an opportunity from. We're also working on an RFQ that will identify qualified partner organizations will give us a qualified pool of potential partners. Take on preservation projects and potentially apply for funding if needed. The RFQ also outlines the county's expectations for these preservation deals. Overall, this enables us to reduce the time it takes to spread the word about preservation opportunities and the time it takes to put deals together that we will be. Yes.
Can you just, forgive the interruption, can you just share with folks when we expect to issue the RFQ?
Yeah, we're looking at mid-month. Issue, yeah.
For those of you who might be interested, whoever that might be, just pay particular attention to that. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. And some additional next steps. The task force recommendations outline other land development process incentives that should be explored to assist with preservation and we'll look at potential fee waivers, potentially granting preservation properties the same status that they would have in revitalization districts, and potentially amending the zoning ordinance regulations to assist with preservation. After we explore these further, we'll discuss with, we still have to go to LDS and DPD to see if these are possible and how they work. We're also gathering affordability expiration dates for all our committed affordable units counties, that we understand when those affordability expirations occur, so we can prioritize those. We're currently looking at recommending a strategy for a strike acquisition fund for preservation, so that we can quickly act on preservation deals. We're in a market that moves very quickly, and speed is important for preservation. Then, as I mentioned before, we're also looking at a manufactured housing. Additional.
Yeah, I'm just gonna ask, was there any reaction that you had to Supervisor Lusk's question, which was, could there be considered off-site offsets if we were going to go to a project and it seemed to fit within the original geography?
Yeah, I think initially we weren't considering off-site units just so we could ensure to keep communities together and keep within our school districts and such. But I think as a last resort, if they can be nearby, it's something we can certainly consider.
I know at the housing committee, some of the supervisors talked about using them as an early warning system. And I think it's actually a good idea. Just look at other channels. Could be local realtors, could be business owners, that are in touch with really what's going on in the community, and they could be like a super early system, compared to CoStar. Just kind of catching that information.
So as we on the agenda, what is next? We have conversations, and one is on the legislative budget priorities, because it is that time of year, and we have talked about that we don't want to be the initiatives that come out of this year, but I also want to just go back to the committees that we authorized. Because as I look around the room, I've had a chance to call, for example, as a new member of the committee, and Norman is volunteer record population. I know Tara is doing wonderful work in terms of housing. We do the emergency. Together, I think. The unit forward in the next couple of years of permit 40,000 with our partners at Rice. Our partners. My point being that so much is happening and so much is moving quickly. So in these meetings, when we have 2 hours, we come together, and then we have our monthly meeting. We're really going to rely on going to these synthesizes information, and following this, Rick and I will get started with an agenda, particularly those that have some urgency. So, just wanted to note that, make sure that when we call, you answer, that you're ready to help us. We have found it works so well with the homelessness task force. They met virtually, they recorded the meetings, had the minutes, all the things that are required for us to do, ensure patient and public meeting notice, and it's just making sure that Regina can publish when there's meetings. Also, so we're excited about that, and I think it's but with that, I'm going to sort of turn it over to my chair here. We wanted to end today's conversation just with some open conversation about legislation and budget priorities. So we note that Regina has provided and Doro had to lead, but we can take on budget committee and we can do fun and then sit in there, but we have the vision you have in your for those that haven't already looked at it, the current language in the county's legislative for the priorities for the state. AHAC every year has been very successful in some of our advocacy, as well as full members in ensuring things like the trust fund, but we know many of these issues. So what we were hoping for is conversation maybe on state priorities, and we've got this as a chief, and any issues for the local level discussion, feedback that we will then give to that budget and legislative committee to take and formulate our position.
Thank you. So let me just say, just to give people context, the session starts about 3 months from today. A little over. So we delegation, hot and heavy, getting ready already, and this is the right time for us to be having these conversations. We're talking with the board of supervisors of the county's legislative folks. We'll get together with the board in December. I want to say it's December 11th or something, where we will talk through precisely what the session is going to look like, what we think the session is going to look like. I think Fairfax County as a county is looking to have us accomplish down there, and then what we think more broadly might happen. I'll tell this group what I said to the executive committee when we met, whenever that was last week. Before. Governor, I've stopped calling him the new governor. He's now the governor. He's been at it for a long time. Governor, I give him the benefit of the doubt on a lot of issues, but particularly this one. He said he has, to his credit, said some good things about his recognition of affordable housing challenges statewide. And he knows because he lives here. Fairfax County, but affordable housing challenges. So, and one out of every 8 Virginians lives in Fairfax. Talking about affordable housing issues being a statewide problem, as far as I'm concerned, he's talking about Fairfax County. That'll be part of our job as a delegation to speak to the fire. I don't get their internal memos very often these days, so I don't know exactly what they're doing. I'm hoping, which was given some of the rhetoric we've seen coming out of the government about the importance, recognizing the importance of affordable housing, that we're going to put his money where his mouth is. He doesn't. Try to do it for him. Doing the politics in the General Assembly right now between the two houses. Fairfax delegation is all of one mind on this, and we have some very powerful people, positions to keep an eye on, particularly dollars. That's sort of a broad picture. I'm happy to talk about anything on this piece of paper. Listening to folks around the table. I just want to assure people we are hot and heavy in getting ready for. always a cockeyed optimist. I'm optimistic there's going to be plenty of controversy in the next session, but I'm hoping affordable housing is not one of them. And quite a lot of that.
Report from the government or the quote from the governor saying he thought the solution was to just build more housing.
I'm not sure which quote you're talking about, Mary.
Isn't that his position on affordable housing, to build more housing?
Just build more of it.
Exactly.
Um,
That is a position.
This is not a partisan body. And I don't want to make it one, so, but sometimes I'll say something on Tuesday that's a little different than what I might say on Wednesday.
Different audience.
Right, but lots of politicians are accused of doing that.
You know, there is somewhat process. The legislature, supervisor, panel, and whole public hearings and formation to the state. What's your thoughts about how we collectively or individually should be in the process? It would be useful for you in the committee. How do we express ourselves? What time, energy, and resources and the public feel accountable for our intimate one-on-one.
Never known this group either as a group or any individuals in it to be shy. And I would never just to become shy. I think unfortunately the answer is both, right? I mean, when there's an opportunity to be talking into a public microphone about affordable housing issues, this group or representative of this group or members of this group ought to be there. Having said that, reality is, right, a lot of these decisions, certainly the conversations that lead to decisions, happen outside of the public. And everyone around this table, all of your neighbors and colleagues should be taking every opportunity you can to make sure. I'm not throwing any of my colleagues under the bus. I meant what I said. We have no problems with that. But there's a spectrum of enthusiasm, and everyone's got different issues. We got to stay. We need to stay in everybody's ear. And then, because we do speak with a loud voice in Fairfax County, we need to run. We'll be talking to legislators elsewhere in the state. Because while Fairfax can carry a big stick, that can also be off-putting to some members of the assembly, believe it or not. When Fairfax County comes down, tries to throw its waiver. So we need to be working from the say the bottom up. That's the wrong way to put it. We need to be working everywhere we can.
One thing I'll just say real quick from a statewide perspective is we are starting to get phone calls from other affordable housing developers in other parts of the state who have funding gaps and their deals don't work anymore. We're incredibly fortunate that Tom and his team, the financial resources that we have locally, they'll solve some of those problems. But that's really where DHCD and we need to hear frustrated sensitive here as well, but no one has called me about the Northern Virginia deal that's on the fritz. They're all figuring, we're all working really, really hard work. But you know, Richmond, Charlottesville, Tidewater, Abingdon, those sorts of markets are where we're seeing, I don't say opportunities, not developer, but deal issues that are, you know, I'm out of sources, you know,
Well,
those sorts of things.
You know, so what I hear said to me is that the members from Charlottesville, Richmond, Abington, you know, they need to know that. So when you pick up the phone and get those calls, you should tell them the people on the other end of that phone. How do you remember that? Because it's just Sullivan or just Fairfax. Necessarily carry the day. It's a great opportunity to sort of spread the word.
Whose draft is this?
This? Candidly, I'm not sure. To tell you the truth.
It's currently in the Board of Supervisors legislative package that was carried over pretty much from last year. The reason it's in red is it's going to be overhauled by October 18th. That's during the legislative meeting. To actually to separate housing and make it more and to update the language. So that will be occurring in the version that you see as we approach October 18th. So this is the starting point. It's correct. And this is perspective, it's last year.
Yeah.
And there's always the legislative priority. And over the years, AHAC has advocated the housing piece to be right up front as a priority in the legislative package, as well as bring together, more detail in this paper. And so the positions you see here are things that many of our members help draft and work on in the past and are still probably relevant more. So we're looking for input on these issues. What other issues we certainly know.
So I have one piece of input, or at least a question. The last bullet. Consider changes to the state law. When I compare that to the rest of it, it's extremely tentative and not assertive at all.
Make changes.
I want to say make changes or change the law.
Yeah, right.
I'll write the comment and then Mary, you get your hand up. Well, since a lot of audiences, I think we fight about when money is short. What do you see us fight about when there's extra money line? And I hope everyone got your check, by the way, in the mail. You're welcome. The current budget looks good, and there's still some money sloshing around. The governor's already talked about setting some of it aside, maybe for other checks that look like smaller at the moment. Ones we all just got. But one of the things when we do have some of this money, some of which is federal money still sloshing around, think about. You don't want to spend it on the next shiny object. You want to invest it in something that's going to have long-term implications, like, let's say a housing trust fund, right? That leverages things. So there will be hopefully some discussions and some money available to think about doing. And I hope governor sees it. Sometimes. Mary?
Yeah, I keep up with a lot of the different advocacy groups trying to push state legislation through on different things. And it seems to me the ones that are most successful are the legislations that have very broad-based support from a number of different groups that made it on a priority list, and they have a legislator spearheading it, and senator and a delegate, and they have support among the legislators. And I'm wondering what the county's doing. And I've also watched the county legislative meetings on TV in Milwaukee. That I know they have a good team down there, and I know they go over things in very great detail and keep up with exactly what's going on. But I'm not sure how those things come together, and I lose track of things at some point. So the bill has to be introduced by delegate, by someone like you. And these are saying what kind of bills the county would like to support. But how does this translate into people introducing actual bills and then getting group support behind those bills to push through in the legislature?
Histories of the process, Mary.
That's right, sausage making.
Yeah. It's not, in some ways, it's exceptionally complicated. In other ways, it's incredibly simple. I will pick up the phone and it's calling the ARCO saying, hey, Rip, would you carry a bill on behalf of does the following thing? I answered, of course. We don't yet. This year's a cap session, so there's a limit on the number of bills each legislature. But if I didn't have room for it, I would immediately call, Scott or someone else. And say, so if the county has bills that it wants introduced, we'll get them introduced. That's kind of easy. The advocacy stuff is things is a piece that the legislator him or herself can help with, but needs groups quarterback because letter writing campaigns, email campaigns, face-to-face meetings all still work. In Richmond, one of the things we found, the remote session of 2 years ago, the circumstances worked pretty darn well, but one of the things we really missed was people come to see us. Lobbyists, I don't regard lobbying as a dirty word. It's how the system works. I'm a lobbyist say we need to do better on manufactured homes. Here's the bill, or will you sign on to co-sponsor? That stuff works.
I'm thinking AHEC might be a way that helps coordinate some of the groups with the county legislative staff and the delegates. Some of the groups that follow are lobbying groups, and that's what they do, and they have staffs. But a lot of the people around here who are activists, maybe not. And it might be something AHEC could, we have a committee. I'm not sure, we don't have definitions of what all these committees do.
But within the week, and segue, and Shelley Murphy have volunteered to convene the committee of the Legislation and Policy Committee. Thank you so much. And I think, and I'm not being, but it is 11:30, and I think what we've heard is some initial warning sort of start this. They are going to let us know as soon as they can, particularly for the going into the rewrite of the October 18th, and then planning all the way up to the December 13th presentation, the legislative Fairfax County delegation meeting, help us prioritize, synthesizing, give better definition to the issues that need to go forward. And Mayor, to your point, focus particularly on the state legislative issues, but also so we can get to folks like Rip and others early in the process. And then Joe Mandaro is the same thing regarding our local budget issues that we go at.
What would be helpful to me is if I had the committees, but also the chair, co-chairs of each committee and the contact information. So that I can, I may be willing to work with some of the other committees and different things, but
we do have some of that information. We're going to, as we're appointing people to do that.
That wasn't in the notification of this meeting. It must have forgotten.
You were here, Lenny, and I know our great convener.
It's a great word I learned. It's called voluntold.
And yes, and Regina has shared, so these are the folks that signed up. It doesn't mean that, and the folks are folks who haven't completed the survey, but we will add to that. I think we do have a roster online, but we will send out the roster with contact information, as well as the folks who have volunteered to help get some of these groups going. And it feeds into the communications, which we know is critical, and then how we get people lined up. But we have a lot of work to do. There are so many issues. I think what I love about this group is It is the most passionate. It is people who our work never ends, including our wonderful staff who work so hard and folks who serve on our J and the planning commission that do so much. So thank you all. We've had, are there any other issues? And for anybody, I just want to go to Tom quickly. Are there other business that you want to comment? We should know.
I will only note that we do have a project that is going before the board on Tuesday for a public hearing. It's the Solis project in Providence District. We're very excited about that one moving forward. That's the land use public hearing and rezoning associated with it. But we got a lot going on, and I really appreciate everybody's support.
We are working.
Here, at the end of your agenda, the next AHEC Executive Committee. I believe it's going to be on that group to plan out the schedule of meetings. And discuss whether additional meeting may be necessary. Remember, our bylaws speak to a minimum of 4 of them.
That's one thing, we're kind of missing the window on the biggest fair housing thing that's going on right now. And I thought some of those people, the Fair Housing Cog Committee and staff were gonna organize something, but I guess they didn't. But the report, the regional cog report, including Fairfax County, and is gonna be coming out probably at the early November, and it's gonna be a 30-day public comment period on it, and will be taken into consideration. And I can make sure everybody has access to that report. And we really would appreciate people getting out and getting people to put in their comments. I don't know what all is planned by the county. I know there's, it's not going to be, COG ran out of money doing this. It took longer and it was harder than they thought. And they don't have much money left to do publicity and public comment. So I guess it's kind of up to us to get out there and get it out there and get people to send in their comments. And if you want a presentation, we can make a presentation, but it'll be too late in January because the public comment will be over.
We've got maybe structures or executive committee and let people know we can do an ad hoc to publish it and have that. It was very informative. I think it would be great, Mary, and I'll work with you to offer that as a optional.
When it's released for public comment, we can put out something electronically to maybe even in your own different media.
By the South was very affirmative and supportive of the work that you're anticipating across the whole.
I'm only going to say on that point that I do expect that there's going to be more direction with respect to publicizing opportunities for public comment on regional aspects. I'll also note that we have been coordinating with the Office of Human Rights and Equity Programs, which is the county's fair housing enforcement arm, and it's the fair housing enforcement or fair housing planning arm, to also conduct affirmative outreach to all the boards, authorities, and commissions. I do, and finally, I'll just add that we do anticipate that COG staff is going to make a presentation to the Housing Committee in November.
Or something that's for those of you that can participate a bit earlier, so we're ready to have our
So I just wanted to say that most of the recommendations are about affordable housing. And there should be a matter of concern in this particular. Yeah, in fact, we might want to.
Anyone want to vote to adjourn?
Thank you. Always wonderful to see you.
Yeah.